The night my brother moved into my apartment, he didn't knock. He used the spare key my mother had given him without telling me, and when I came home from a 12-hour shift at the firm to find his shoes in my entryway and his duffel bag on my couch, my mother was standing in my kitchen making coffee like it was her house. "He needs a place," she said. "You have space." I had a one-bedroom in downtown Nashville that I paid $140 a month for. I had space the way a lifeboat has space. Technically, but not really. That was the beginning of a very long unraveling. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old. I'm a forensic accountant, which means I spend my days finding money that people are trying to hide. I'm good at it. I've been good at it since I was 24, when I passed my CPA exam on the first try and got hired by a firm that specialized in fraud investigation. I won't tell you my salary, but I will tell you that I drive a 2019 Civic with a cracked bumper, and I buy my work clothes at a consignment shop 2 blocks from my office, and I do both of those things on purpose. My brother's name is Preston. He's 34. He's never held a job longer than 8 months. The thing you need to understand about my family is that Preston has always been the one they worried about, which meant he was always the one they prioritized. When we were kids, my mother would say it with a kind of resigned tenderness, like she was describing a stray cat she'd taken in. "Preston just needs more help than you do," she'd tell me. "You're so capable, Sloane. You don't need us the same way he does." I internalized that for 20 years. I became more capable. I asked for less. I put myself through the last 2 years of college on scholarships and one part-time job at a campus library, and another part-time job answering phones at an insurance office. My parents helped Preston with rent twice during that same period, and once with a car payment, and once with something vaguely described as a situation he got into that I was never given details about. I didn't ask. I was capable. The night I found Preston on my couch, I sat down across from him and looked at him for a long moment. He had the particular look of a man who had recently been evicted, which is a specific kind of exhaustion that sits in the eyes. His landlord had locked him out. He had 2 weeks of clothes in the duffel bag. He needed to stay just for a little while. I said okay. I said it because my mother was watching me with an expression that would have curdled milk, and because I was tired after 12 hours, and because I was 31 years old and still could not figure out how to say no to my own family without feeling like I was committing a crime. He stayed for 4 months. 4 months of finding his dishes in the sink. 4 months of him having loud phone calls in my living room at 11 at night. 4 months of my grocery budget quietly doubling because he ate everything in the refrigerator and replaced nothing. I started keeping specific items in my work bag. A single-serve coffee pod, an apple, a protein bar, because if I left anything on the counter, it would be gone. My mother called twice a week during those 4 months. She never once called to ask how I was managing. She called to tell me what a good thing I was doing, how much it meant to Preston, how the family appreciated my sacrifice. The word sacrifice should have told me something. You don't describe helping someone as a sacrifice unless you know it's costing the person something real. In the 5th month, my lease came up for renewal. My landlord offered me the option to move to a larger unit, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor that had just opened up. The rent was $2,300. I thought about it for approximately 48 hours. I ran the numbers. I could afford it technically, but I had been very deliberately funneling money elsewhere, and the extra $460 a month would slow things down considerably. I told my landlord no. I signed another year on my 1-bedroom. I did not tell Preston or my mother about the 2-bedroom option. 2 weeks later, my mother called on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing a spreadsheet for a case involving a construction company that had been overbilling a municipal government for 3 years. I had my laptop open and a highlighter in my hand, and I was deep in a column of numbers when she said, "We think it's time for Preston to have his own space." I waited. "The apartment upstairs from us just opened up," she continued. "Mr. Hensley moved to assisted living. It's a nice unit, 2 bedrooms. My parents live in a duplex they own outright in Murfreesboro. They bought it in 2003 for what would now seem like a laughable price and paid it off a decade ago. The upstairs unit generates rental income. It had until recently been generating $975 a month from Mr. Hensley, who was 81 and very quiet and had lived there for 9 years. That's great, I said carefully. The thing is, my mother said, we'd need to cover first and last and a security deposit to hold it for him, and you know how Preston is right now with money. I put the highlighter down. How much? I said. We were thinking, since you've been so wonderful already and since you're so stable. How much, Mom? $2,900. It's first, last, and deposit. And then going forward, the rent would be $975, which is very reasonable, and we'd help when we could. You own the building, I said. There was a pause. Yes, she said. You own the building, and you're asking me to pay rent for Preston to live in your building. We have a mortgage on the property taxes and the insurance and the maintenance. You told me last Easter that duplex has been paid off for 11 years. Another pause, longer this time. Sloane, this is family. We're not asking you to do something unreasonable. You're in a position to help. I helped. I don't know why I helped. I've spent a significant amount of time with a therapist since then trying to understand why I helped, and the best answer I've come up with is that I had been trained, very methodically and over a very long period of time, to understand that being capable meant being available, and that being available meant being useful, and that being useful to my family was the price I paid for being loved by them. I wrote a check for $2,900 and handed it to my mother at Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, and she hugged me and said she didn't know what they'd do without me. And my father said nothing because my father almost always said nothing, and Preston said thanks, man, which was both grammatically odd and emotionally adequate. Preston moved upstairs. I drove back to Nashville. I sat in my cracked bumper Civic in the parking garage under my building for a long time before I went inside. 3 weeks after that, my firm assigned me to a new case. The case involved a private investment company, I can't give you the name, that had been filing fraudulent income projections to attract outside investors. It was complicated and absorbing, and it required a particular kind of attention that I had been practicing my whole life, which is the attention of someone looking for the thing that doesn't quite fit, the number that's slightly too round, the expense that repeats on a pattern that's just slightly too regular, the signature that leans a different direction on page 7 than it does on page 1. I was very good at this work. Over the next year, I was promoted twice. My salary increased by an amount I won't specify, but that was meaningful. I began putting the additional income into 2 places: a brokerage account under an LLC I had registered 18 months earlier, and a HYSA that I checked every Monday morning the way some people check sports scores. The LLC was called Clearwater Advisory Group. Nobody in my family had ever heard of it. Preston, during the same year, was evicted from my parents' upstairs unit for non-payment of rent. He had paid 3 months and then stopped. My mother told me this on a phone call in October, approximately 11 months after I'd written the check. I asked what happened to the $975 a month. She said Preston had fallen behind. He's going to have to move back in with us, she said, into the guest room. Okay, I said. Which means we don't really have a guest room anymore. A pause. We were hoping you might take some of his things, just to store. I don't have space for storage. Sloane, you have a whole second bedroom? I have a 1-bedroom apartment. We thought you moved into the larger unit when your lease. I signed another year on the 1-bedroom. I told you that. There was a silence that had a particular texture to it. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. We just need a little help, my mother said. Her voice had shifted. It was softer now, and the softness had always worked on me the way certain sounds work on certain animals, a frequency I was biologically susceptible to. You're the only one who has any stability right now. We're doing everything we can for Preston, and it's a lot on us. It's a lot on your father, especially. He's not as young as he used to be. I agreed to take 2 boxes of Preston's things. I drove to Murfreesboro on a Saturday and loaded them into my trunk and stacked them in my entryway closet and didn't open them. What I did do, that same Saturday afternoon on the drive back, was call my real estate broker. Her name is Anita. I've worked with her for 2 years. She knows what I'm looking for and she knows how I operate, which is quietly and without drama, and with a clear sense of exactly what something is worth. The property in Franklin, I said. Is it still available? It was. I want to move forward, I said. The property in Franklin, Tennessee was a 3-bedroom brick house built in 1987 on a half-acre lot, 11 miles from my parents' duplex in Murfreesboro. I had been watching it for 4 months. I had done my own comp analysis, which is not difficult when you do financial analysis for a living. The asking price was $387,000. The owners had already reduced it once. They were motivated. I offered $371,000. They countered at $380,000. I came up to $375,500 with the contingency that they cover closing costs. We closed 6 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone. I paid cash, or rather, Clearwater Advisory Group paid cash because I had structured the purchase through the LLC for reasons that I won't fully detail here, but that a forensic accountant would immediately understand. The deed listed the buyer as Clearwater Advisory Group. My name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. I kept driving to my apartment in Nashville on Monday mornings. I kept coming home on Friday evenings. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners in Murfreesboro, where Preston was now sleeping in the guest room, and my mother was cooking for 3, and my father was watching football, and nobody asked me a single question about my life that wasn't prefaced by some version of "since you're doing so well." The unraveling, part 2, began on a Thursday in February. My mother called while I was at the office. I let it go to voicemail because I was in the middle of something, and when I listened to the message during my lunch break, I had to play it twice to make sure I'd heard it correctly. Sloane, we need to talk to you about something important. Your father and I have been thinking about selling the duplex. Preston found a house, actually, and we'd like to help him with the down payment, and the duplex equity would cover most of it. We were hoping you might be able to contribute the rest. We're thinking maybe $40,000. You've been so good to this family, and we know you have savings, and this would really set Preston up properly. Call us back when you get a chance. I sat with my lunch getting cold in front of me. $40,000. They wanted me to contribute $40,000 toward a down payment on a house for my 34-year-old brother, who had been evicted from their own building for not paying $975 a month. I did not call back that afternoon. I called my therapist instead. Her name is Dr. Armitage, and she is not a warm person, which is exactly what I need, because warm people tell you that your feelings are valid, and Dr. Armitage tells you what she actually observes. What she observed that February afternoon was that I had spent my entire adult life paying a kind of informal tax to my family in exchange for the feeling of belonging to them. What would happen, she said, if you stopped paying it? I thought about that for a long time. I called my mother back on Saturday morning. I told her I couldn't contribute $40,000. My mother said she was surprised. My father, apparently on speakerphone, said he thought I was in a better position than that. I said that position wasn't really the issue. My mother said it was a hard time for the whole family. I said I understood that. You've always had a harder time giving than the rest of us, my mother said. I don't know where that comes from. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, I want to have dinner together next Sunday, all 4 of us. I have something I want to discuss. There was a brief confusion. This was not how our Sunday dinners usually worked, with announced topics. But my mother said fine, and we hung up. And I sat in my apartment in Nashville and opened my laptop and drafted 3 different versions of what I wanted to say before I decided the only version that was true was the simplest one. That Sunday, I drove to Murfreesboro. My mother had made pot roast, which is her gesture of goodwill and also her armor. Preston was at the table. My father had his reading glasses on his head the way he does when he's been working himself up to something. We ate. We talked about nothing. After dinner, my mother brought out coffee, and I folded my hands on the table and looked at all 3 of them. I have something to tell you, I said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. They nodded. I've been building something for the last several years, I said. A consulting business. I registered it as an LLC in 2022. It's called Clearwater Advisory Group, And through that LLC, about 4 months ago, I purchased a property. My brother looked up. The property is in Franklin, I said. It's a 3-bedroom house on a half-acre. I bought it for $375,500. The room was very quiet. I've been thinking about what to do with it, I said. I've thought about renting it. I've thought about selling it. And what I've decided is that I'm going to move into it. I've already given my notice to my landlord in Nashville. I'll be living in Franklin starting March 1st. My mother set down her coffee cup. But, she said slowly, you said you couldn't contribute to Preston's. I can't, I said. The purchase depleted most of my liquid reserves, and I'm rebuilding. But that's not actually the part I wanted to tell you. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. I set it on the table. 3 weeks ago, I said, I found out that you applied for a home equity line of credit on the duplex. The application listed my income as a co-borrower. The silence was of a different quality now. I didn't sign anything, I said. My name was added to the application without my knowledge or my signature. That's bank fraud. I verified this with 2 different attorneys. My father took off his reading glasses. Now, I said, I'm not calling the bank. I'm not filing a report. What I am doing is telling you clearly that I know, and that it won't happen again, and that the dynamic in this family has to change starting right now. Sloane, my mother started. I have paid, I said quietly, in cash and in time and in the kind of invisible labor that nobody counted because nobody was looking, for the feeling of being part of this family. I paid Preston's deposit. I drove to Murfreesboro to pick up his boxes. I've shown up every Sunday for 3 years and sat at this table and watched my resources get treated like a community fund that I didn't get a vote in. That's over. Preston was staring at the folder. I love you, I said, because I did, because that was the worst and truest part of it. I love all 3 of you, and I'm not disappearing. But I'm done being the one who gives and gives and gives and so that everyone else can take and take and take and call it family. My mother had started crying quietly. My father's face had gone very still. The duplex application, I said. You need to have my name removed. Your bank will want documentation. I can walk you through what to file if you want. I know how to do it. I closed the folder. I picked up my coffee cup. I drank what was left. That's all I wanted to say, I said. My brother said nothing for a long time. Then I didn't know about the application. I looked at him. He was looking at the table. I believe you, I said, and I did. The drive back to Nashville that evening was quiet. The February sky was doing the thing it does in Tennessee in winter, all pewter and flat, no contrast anywhere. I had the heater on and a podcast playing that I wasn't really listening to, and somewhere around mile marker 11 on 840, I started crying in a way that had nothing to do with being sad, or at least not only that. I moved into the Franklin house on March 3rd, 2 days later than planned because of a delay with the moving company. The first night, I ate takeout on the floor of the living room because my dining table hadn't arrived yet, and I sat there in the too big, too quiet house that was entirely mine. Every beam and cabinet and faucet purchased with money I had earned in the years when I was supposed to be too busy taking care of everyone else to take care of myself. My mother called that night. I answered. Are you okay? She asked. Yes, I said, and that was true too. She didn't apologize that night. She didn't apologize for a while. What she did do, 3 weeks later, was call on a Tuesday and ask if she could come see the house. No Preston, no agenda, just her. I said yes. She pulled into my driveway on a Saturday morning in late March in her old Camry, and she stood in my front yard and looked at the house for a moment before she came inside. I gave her the tour. She was quiet through most of it. In the kitchen, she ran her hand along the counter and looked out the window at the backyard, where there was a bird feeder I'd hung from an oak tree on my first weekend. You did all this yourself, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. She turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. There was something in it that might have been pride, and something that might have been grief, and something that looked around the edges like the beginning of recognition. "I didn't always see you clearly," she said. I put the kettle on. "I know," I said. "I know you didn't." We had tea. We sat at my new dining table. It had arrived the week before, and we talked for 2 hours about things we had never talked about before. How hard it had been for her when Preston struggled. How much she had leaned on the belief that I was fine so she didn't have to worry about two of us at once. How the line between capable and neglected had blurred so gradually that she hadn't noticed when it disappeared. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. It was the closest we'd come in 31 years to an honest conversation. My father called the following week. He's not a talker, my father, so the call was short and uncomfortable, and he said something like, "Your mother told me you two had a good visit." And I said yes, and he said good. And there was a long pause, and then he said, "The application thing was wrong." "I know that," and I said, "I know you do," and he said okay, and we hung up. Preston texted me in April. He had found a roommate situation. 3 guys, a house in Smyrna, split 4 ways. He was working at a logistics company. It was stable, he said, or at least more stable than before. He asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said yes. We met at a place on a Wednesday morning. He ordered black coffee and I ordered a latte, and we sat by the window and talked for an hour about nothing important. A TV show he'd been watching, a trail I'd been hiking near the house, the way Nashville had changed in the last 5 years. It was the most normal conversation I'd ever had with my brother. No transaction underneath it, no ass coming. Before we left, he said, "I know I wasn't easy to have around." "No," I said. "I'm working on it," he said. I looked at him across the coffee cups. He looked tired in the same way he'd always looked tired, but there was something different around the eyes. Less of that particular evicted man exhaustion, something more like someone beginning to reckon. "I know," I said. The bird feeder in my backyard has 3 different species that visit regularly now. I know this because I started a list, which is the kind of thing you can do when you have a yard and quiet and enough space inside your own life to notice small things. On Sunday mornings, I sit at the kitchen table with coffee and watch them, and I don't drive to Murfreesboro, and nobody calls to ask me for anything. My mother texts now instead of calling. The texts are shorter, more careful. She sends pictures sometimes, the garden, the cat, a recipe she tried. I text back. It's a different kind of contact than we had before. Less weight in it. More truth. The duplex is still there. My name is off the application. Anita tells me the Franklin market is up another 4% since I closed, which I already knew because I check every quarter. Clearwater Advisory Group has 3 properties now. I'm not telling you which ones. What I will tell you is this. The night my brother moved into my apartment without knocking, I thought it was the beginning of a problem. I was right about that. What I didn't know was that the problem had started much earlier, in the quiet accumulation of all the times I was told that being capable meant being available, and that being available meant being used, and that being used was the same as being loved. It isn't. I know the difference now. I learned it the hard way, which is the only way some lessons come. And I learned it in a house that is mine, on a half-acre in Franklin, with a bird feeder in the backyard and a dining table I eat at alone most nights, and not one single thing in it that I didn't choose. The hardest part wasn't the $2,900 check. It wasn't the 2 boxes I drove to Murfreesboro to pick up, or the 4 months of my groceries disappearing, or even the loan application with my name forged on it. The hardest part was how long I believed that giving without limit was the same thing as being a good person. I was wrong about that, and the wrongness cost me years. What I've come to understand, sitting at that dining table in Franklin, watching birds I've learned to identify by name, is that there's a version of ethics that gets twisted into something unrecognizable when it only flows one direction. I was told I was the responsible one, the capable one, the one who didn't need as much. And I accepted that framing so completely that I built my entire identity around it. I became someone who gave not out of genuine generosity, but out of fear. Fear that if I stopped, I would stop belonging. That's not morality. That's just a more socially acceptable kind of self-abandonment. The intelligence I'd spent years developing professionally. The forensic instinct, the eye for the number that doesn't quite fit, the pattern that repeats just slightly too regularly. I refused to turn it on my own life. I could identify fraud in a construction company's billing records from 3 states away, but I couldn't see that my own family had been running a version of the same scheme on me for 20 years. That's not stupidity. That's willful blindness, which is its own kind of choice. The moment I started looking clearly at the duplex application, at the decades of asymmetry, at what was actually being asked of me versus what I was being given in return, the picture came into focus fast. Clarity, once you allow it, is not gentle. And then there's the question of what you do once you see clearly. That's where most people stop. They see the pattern, they understand it, and then the weight of the history, the love underneath the dysfunction, the grief of what could have been different, pins them in place. I understand that paralysis. I lived in it for 31 years. What I finally understood is that staying in motion is itself a form of integrity. Registering the LLC, watching the Franklin property for 4 months, sitting at that Sunday table and saying the thing I had never allowed myself to say out loud. None of those actions were dramatic in the moment. Each one was just a small decision to keep going in the direction I had chosen for myself, even when it was uncomfortable, even when my mother was crying and my father had gone very still. Preston texted me last week. He's got a second job now, something in warehouse logistics on weekends. He said it was going okay. I told him that was good, and I meant it without any weight behind it. No resentment, no performance of forgiveness, just the plain fact of a brother I'm trying to know differently than I knew him before. What I did for myself, nobody handed me. The house, the LLC, the career, but also the harder things, the therapy, the boundary held at a Sunday dinner table, the willingness to be the one who changes the pattern even when everyone else in the room wants the pattern to stay the same. Those things came from deciding over and over in small moments no one else saw that my life was mine to build. That decision is available to everyone. It doesn't require a particular salary or a forensic accounting license or a half-acre in Franklin. It only requires the honesty to look at what's actually happening, the understanding to know what it means, and the willingness to keep moving anyway. I'm still working on all three. Most days, I think I'm getting somewhere.